this is the part where it gets quite interesting for all of us. Now, again, when it comes to the UAE, sometimes, a lot of us just assume that, oh, it's all about Sharia law. But that's actually not the case. The UAE is essentially a civil law system, which in a way is influenced by Sharia laws. So the UAE actually has a set of codified laws. So for example, the UAE has a civil code, it has a criminal code, it has companies law, it has evidence law, a competition law. Certain laws are more influenced by Sharia. For example, personal laws are influenced by Sharia. So for example, if there's a marital dispute, Sharia law is likely going to come into play, as well as the criminal code is also influenced by Sharia. Having said that, if there is any criminal matter, what happens is the criminal code is followed. Now, and just to give you another example from my personal experience, I'm a corporate and commercial lawyer. So I generally just rely on the company's law. I rely on all the corporate laws, and generally I've never really come across Sharia law as such. So, we have a law, we just follow whatever that, whatever that's mentioned in the law, and then that's how it is. Of course, there's market practice, but I have never really faced any issue with Sharia law coming into play in my corporate matters. Now, so that's one, and that's why it's quite easy for, let's say, an Indian lawyer or for a foreign lawyer to come here, because what you can do is once you read the laws, you can sort of get acquainted with the system and you can actually start practicing. Another interesting aspect about the UAE is that it's not just a civil law system. So the UAE has multiple jurisdictions within the country. So just to explain this, because this can be quite complicated for somebody who's new to the country, the UAE actually has 2 financial free zones. And those 2 financial free zones, they have their own courts and their own legal system, which is actually based on common law. So in Dubai, one of the financial free zones, we have the Dubai International Financial Center. That's the DIFC, which you will see in the presentation, DIFC. And then in Abu Dhabi, you have the Abu Dhabi Global Market. So that's the ADGM. Now, the DIFC and the ADGM, they have their own courts, and they have and in these courts, everything is in the English language. And this is essentially, they're influenced by English law. So for example, if I were based in the ADGM, or if I had a dispute which was subject to ADGM laws and the ADGM courts, then the judges in the ADGM would actually follow English law. They would actually, look at English precedent. So it's a common law system that's followed. And that's where common law lawyers can actually play a big role in the UAE, because again, just to give you another example, if you're an Indian lawyer, then we are sort of familiar with the English legal system because a lot of our laws are derived from English law. So for you to move and, let's say, get acquainted with the DIFC or ADGM laws, it's going to be a lot easier. And if you were to be a dispute resolution lawyer as well, it would be sort of familiar with things would be a little more familiar for you. And again, I can also give you another example in terms of our corporate contracts as well. Sometimes I subjected to DIFC laws or DIFC courts. So, that is quite similar to what we've been practicing back in India or in any other country. So yeah, I would say there is a common law influence in the UAE as well. So don't think that it's just a civil law system. There's both civil law and common law in the UAE. And this is where you can use this to your advantage if you're moving to the UAE as a common law lawyer. In any event, if you're a civil law lawyer, that's also a big advantage. So both can coexist. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the local courts, because the difference between the DIFC, ADGM, and the local courts is that the local courts, everything happens in the Arabic language. So yes, I mean, if you're a true blue litigation lawyer, you might face a little bit of issues there. Having said that, I have dealt with certain litigation matters, and what happens is there's a lot of teamwork involved, because you would have to, let's say, work with, your colleague who's probably an Arabic speaking person. So you can sometimes just, summarize the facts or arguments and provide it to your colleague, and, and then you can have a discussion on how to proceed with a particular case. Again, so this is where, teamwork essentially plays a big role. In terms of the court system, it's quite straightforward. You do have a court of first instance, which is a trial court. You have a court of appeal, and you also have a Supreme Court. Sometimes, like in the case of Dubai, there is, Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah, they also have their own courts. But I'm not really going to talk much about that, because that is probably going to complicate the discussion. The key point that I'm trying to say is that, there is room for lawyers from foreign jurisdictions as well. And you do not have to think that the UAE is all about Sharia law or, knowing the Arabic language. If if you're good in English, you can pretty much succeed in this jurisdiction. They have a very simple system. In fact, the DIFC and the ADGM, they're actually really trying to simplify the legal system. So the DIFC, for example, they actually have a small claims tribunal. So, for small matters, they try to avoid lawyers as well. So let's say there are two people who have a small dispute and it's a very small value. The DIFC, Small Claims Tribunal, will try to get those parties to resolve the disputes themselves. So yeah, they also have they have a 3-tier system as well in the DIFC and the ADGM. And generally, the matters proceed quite quickly as well, because the caseload is not that high. There is an agreement between these financial free zones and the local courts. So let's say that there is a, let's say, court of appeal in the DIFC. So let's say that I do get a judgment from the DIFC court, then I can actually go to the Dubai local court to get an enforcement judgment. It depends on where the party is, right, where you're enforcing your judgment. So let's say if the party is in the DIFC, then you do not have to go to the local court. But let's say your party against whom you want to enforce a judgment is in onshore UAE, then yes, you have to go to the local court to get an enforcement judgment. And that generally is not an issue. It is a little confusing in the sense that for criminal matters, everything is subject to the local courts. So the police will have jurisdiction over any criminal matter which happens in the DIFC or the ADGM. So that is the only exception when it comes to the DIFC and ADGM. One of the key exceptions. So let's say that a crime or a murder is committed in DIFC, which is very unlikely to happen. It will be subject, the Dubai police will have jurisdiction, and it will essentially go to the last point that I wanted to just say is that arbitration is also popular in the UAE. So let's say as a corporate lawyer, sometimes I would in my contract mention subject, the dispute resolution clause to arbitration. So again, arbitration, you have a lot of flexibility. You can have your proceedings in English. You can decide what laws you want to subject your contract to. So if you want to make it English law, you can do that. You can make it DIFC laws. You can make it ADGM laws. So there is a lot of flexibility here. And this is where, again, a lawyer arbitration lawyers could. So yeah, arbitration is also popular in the UAE. You have a lot of institutional arbitrations happening here. So if you're using I mean, if you're, again, arbitration happens in the English language. So again, this is a scope for a lot of arbitration lawyers to actually, practice in the UAE. It's a competitive market, but yes, you do have scope here.